because it has pointed out to me the lack of caring from my colleagues across the dais when it comes to how the DOJ under Biden was weaponized, how they used this for political attack on their political opponents, and the smugness from some of my colleagues across the dais. I think they enjoyed it. I think they wanted it to continue. And I think that's why they oppose some of the reforms that you are making to actually get people out across the country and to get them working and to have people that are actually finding out what the FBI and the DOJ did. You look at what happened with Crossfire Hurricane and the way some Democrats tried to blow that up and make it some big issue and all about Donald Trump and the accusations, and of course, they've been proven wrong. You look at what has happened, what we're finding out about Arctic frost, and the way we were surveilled, and the way Senator Graham, Senator Hawley, and I, we don't know what all they got. We don't know who all they tracked. But to tap our phones, to pull that data, for these wireless companies to have allowed them to have that, and for them to use it in their investigations. How disgusting is that?
Welcome to our comprehensive analysis of the recent Senate hearing that has sent shockwaves through the political landscape. Today, we're diving deep into a heated exchange that reveals the fundamental tensions within our justice system and the ongoing debate about political accountability in America. The hearing begins with Senator Blackburn delivering what can only be described as a powerful opening statement. She doesn't hold back, expressing her profound disappointment with what she perceives as a disturbing lack of concern from her colleagues across the aisle. According to her perspective, the weaponization of the Department of Justice under the Biden administration wasn't just a bureaucratic misstep, it was a calculated political strategy. But here's the question we need to ask ourselves. Is this assessment accurate? Or are we witnessing political rhetoric designed to score points? Senator Blackburn's frustration becomes palpable as she describes the smugness she observes in her Democratic colleagues. She goes further, suggesting that some of them actually enjoyed watching the DOJ pursue investigations against political opponents. This is a serious accusation that strikes at the heart of our democratic institutions. Think about this for a moment. If elected officials are genuinely taking pleasure in the prosecution of their political adversaries, what does that say about the state of our democracy? Do you believe such attitudes exist, or is this an exaggeration meant to inflame partisan tensions? The senator then pivots to discussing the reforms being implemented under the current administration. She emphasizes the importance of getting people back to work and conducting thorough investigations into what the FBI and DOJ actually did during previous administrations. This raises an important consideration. How do we balance the need for accountability with the risk of creating an endless cycle of political retribution? When does legitimate oversight cross the line into political vendetta? Let's talk about Crossfire Hurricane for a moment. This investigation into alleged Russian interference and potential collusion with the Trump campaign has been a lightning rod for controversy since its inception. Senator Blackburn argues that Democrats tried to, quote, blow that up and make it into a massive issue centered on Donald Trump, only to be proven wrong. However, the reality of Crossfire Hurricane is far more nuanced than a simple right or wrong dichotomy. The investigation did result in several convictions, though not directly related to collusion. So we have to ask, were the Democrats wrong to pursue these investigations, or were they fulfilling their oversight responsibilities? What's your take on this complicated issue? Now, the discussion shifts to something even more concerning: Arctic frost. This surveillance program, according to Senator Blackburn, involved tracking senators, including herself, Senator Graham, and Senator Hawley. She expresses outrage that their phones were tapped and data was collected from wireless companies. The implications here are staggering. If government agencies can surveil elected senators without proper oversight, what protections do ordinary citizens have? This isn't just about political figures, it's about the fundamental right to privacy that every American should enjoy. Senator Blackburn's anger is visceral as she describes this situation as disgusting. She emphasizes that they don't even know the full extent of the surveillance, who else was tracked, what other data was collected, how it was used. Do you think her outrage is justified? Should there be stricter limitations on government surveillance capabilities, even when investigating potential threats? The senator then addresses what she sees as a troubling lack of concern from her Democratic colleagues about this weaponization. She specifically mentions some who have expressed worry about bureaucrats in the DOJ and FBI being fired. Her response is unequivocal. If they did wrong, they should not only be fired, but prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This brings us to a critical question about accountability in government. When federal employees violate the law or abuse their positions, what should the consequences be? Is termination enough, or should criminal prosecution follow? Senator Blackburn's call for a special counsel to investigate Arctic frost represents a significant escalation. Special counsels are typically appointed when there are serious allegations that require independent investigation. She is essentially arguing that the surveillance of senators constitutes illegal activity worthy of criminal prosecution. But here's what we need to consider. Could this call for a special counsel itself become another instance of politicizing the justice system? How do we ensure that investigations are legitimate and not simply tit-for-tat political warfare? The senator then makes an observation that cuts to the heart of the partisan divide. She suggests that her Democratic colleagues are resistant to reform because they don't actually want one tier of justice. They want two tiers. According to this view, Democrats saw the DOJ as their playbox, a tool they could manipulate to spy on opponents and further their political goals. This is an extraordinarily serious allegation. If true, it would represent a fundamental betrayal of democratic principles. But we have to ask, is this a fair characterization, or is it an oversimplification of complex institutional dynamics? Senator Blackburn expresses her satisfaction that the new administration is cleaning house and removing those who haven't served the American people well. She's emphatic. They need to be gone. But this raises important questions about civil service protections and the balance between political accountability and professional independence in government agencies. Should political appointees have the power to fire career civil servants based on perceived political disloyalty? Where do we draw the line between necessary reform and political purges? When the senator asks about efforts to end weaponization, we get a response that's equally forceful. The respondent begins by acknowledging that weaponization against senators should concern everyone, Democrats and Republicans alike. This is a crucial point. If government surveillance and investigation powers are being abused, it's not a partisan issue. It's a constitutional crisis that threatens everyone's rights. Do you agree that this should be a bipartisan concern, or do you think partisan considerations inevitably color how we view these issues? The response continues with a stark assessment. There was a two-tier system of justice under the Biden administration, and we're learning about it every day. The speaker specifically mentions Jack Smith and his investigation of Donald Trump as an example of weaponization. He argues that the Biden administration weaponized the entire Justice Department, all of the law enforcement agencies, against Trump, his family members, and friends for years. This is presented as fact, but we should examine it critically. Were these investigations legitimate responses to potential criminal conduct, or were they politically motivated prosecutions? What evidence supports each interpretation? The speaker declares that this weaponization is now over, that no one is above the law, and that there's now a one-tier system of justice. This is a powerful claim, but it demands scrutiny. How can we verify that the system is truly fair and not simply weaponized in a different direction? What mechanisms ensure accountability and prevent abuse regardless of which party holds power? The language then takes an interesting turn as they discuss surveillance on the 2016 transition team. Senator Blackburn notes that this isn't the first time such surveillance has occurred. It's the second time. She specifically calls out James Comey and Christopher Wray, suggesting they bear responsibility for allowing these abuses to happen. This historical context is important because it suggests a pattern of behavior that transcends any single administration. If surveillance abuses have occurred under multiple administrations, doesn't that indicate systemic problems rather than partisan ones? Now, let's shift gears and talk about something more positive. The Memphis Safe Task Force. This represents a concrete example of federal-state cooperation to address violent crime. Senator Blackburn presents impressive statistics: 503 arrests in July and August with the FBI task force, then an additional 321 arrests just last week with the Memphis Safe Task Force. They've seized 83 firearms, recovered 7 missing children, arrested 28 known gang members, and secured over 120 federal indictments. These are tangible results that directly impact public safety. The senator emphasizes that this success comes from coordinated effort among 13 federal and state agencies working together. She suggests that cities like Portland and Chicago are missing out by not embracing similar collaboration. This raises an interesting question. Why would any city refuse federal assistance in combating violent crime? Is it purely ideological opposition, or are there legitimate concerns about federal overreach and local autonomy? Senator Blackburn is particularly proud that this effort is making Memphis safe again. The phrase deliberately echoes campaign rhetoric, but beyond the political messaging, there's a real question here about the role of federal law enforcement in addressing local crime. Should the federal government be more involved in fighting crime in American cities? Or does this represent an inappropriate expansion of federal power? What do you think is the right balance? The discussion then turns to an issue that's become increasingly controversial in recent years: cashless bail. Senator Blackburn criticizes Memphis's district attorney for implementing what she characterizes as a cashless bail system that creates a revolving door where criminals are arrested and back on the streets the next night. She and Representative Stefanik have introduced legislation to end cashless bail in D.C. and remove federal funds from jurisdictions that practice it. The speaker credits both Senator Blackburn and Senator Hagerty for bringing Memphis's crime problem to his attention before he was even sworn in as Attorney General. He also mentions that FBI Director Patel was on the ground immediately, though he acknowledges that more was needed. Memphis has what he describes as the highest violent crime rate in the entire country, making it an iconic city that deserves better. Here's where the message becomes particularly pointed. The speaker says he doesn't understand why Chicago, Portland, and other sanctuary jurisdictions don't want to work with the federal government. He describes gangs, specifically transnational gangs, as rampant in these cities because they're harboring them. Then comes the ultimatum. Whether they want to or not, we are going to come in and make it safe for their citizens, whether these liberal lawmakers want to or not. This statement demands our attention. On one hand, it's a promise to protect citizens regardless of local political resistance. On the other hand, it raises questions about federalism and the appropriate relationship between federal and local government. Should the federal government be able to override local authorities and conduct law enforcement operations against the wishes of elected local officials? Where does legitimate federal authority end and overreach begin? These aren't easy questions, and reasonable people can disagree. The speaker then addresses the Memphis DA directly, promising to protect Memphis police officers by taking every single case federally that we can because the DA has cashless bail. This is a remarkable statement. The federal government is essentially promising to bypass local prosecution because it disagrees with local policy. He also mentions that similar work is being done in D.C. to change bail policies there. Senator Blackburn responds positively, noting that Memphis's mayor is doing great work. But then she raises a concerning incident. A Shelby County official attempted to dox officers by tweeting their location during an operation. The tweet described 4 Fed vehicles and a trooper, men in full gear and guns on the street, with a hashtag telling people to pay attention, folks. This incident highlights the dangers faced by law enforcement officers when their identities and locations are publicized. Senator Blackburn has introduced legislation to make it a crime to dox federal law enforcement officials while they're doing their jobs. She notes that while Apple and Google claim to have removed apps that facilitate such doxing, the threat remains real. The speaker's final comment is brief but significant, thanking Senator Blackburn for her support. This entire exchange reveals the complex interplay between federal and local authority, the ongoing debates about criminal justice reform, and the deeply partisan nature of these discussions. So, where does this leave us? We've witnessed a hearing that touches on surveillance, accountability, criminal justice reform, federalism, and the fundamental question of whether our justice system treats everyone equally. These aren't abstract policy debates. They have real consequences for American citizens, whether you're a senator concerned about surveillance, a Memphis resident worried about crime, or a defendant navigating the bail system. As we reflect on this hearing, we need to ask ourselves some hard questions. Are we witnessing legitimate reform and accountability? Or are we seeing the politicization of justice continue in a different direction? Can we have a justice system that's truly fair and nonpartisan, or will political considerations always influence how laws are enforced? What role should the federal government play in addressing local crime, and how do we balance public safety with civil liberties? These questions don't have easy answers, but they're questions we must grapple with if we want a justice system worthy of a democratic society. What's your take on these issues? Do you believe the concerns raised in this hearing are legitimate, or do you see them as partisan rhetoric? The answers matter because they shape the kind of country we're going to have. Thank you for watching this in-depth analysis. The conversation about justice, accountability, and the proper role of government continues, and it's a conversation that needs all of our voices.